Hello everybody, my name's Samuel Joy and we're here to look back on the Griffin Gate. Sorry for the last time I posted the volume of that, but this time it's going to be different. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? The Griffin Gate by Vashti Hardy, with illustrations by Natalie Smiley. Chapter 1. Invisible. Rain dribbled down the windows of Griffin's house, and the skies were a dismal grey. The weather perfectly matched grey Griffin's mood. Grace sat on her bed, pretending not to hear her mum knocking on the door. "You have to go," said Watson, the family raven. He was perched on Grace's bedpost. "No one will notice if I'm not there," said Grace. There was a soft whir of turning cogs as Waddesdon spreaded his mechanical wings and ruffled his feathers. The door swung open. "Grace, come on," said her mum, Annie. "Why aren't you wearing your uniform? It's not every day we're invited to the mayor's office." "But what's the point?" Grace thought, when she still had 2 years to wait before she was allowed to take part in a real mission. "Do I have to go?" she asked. "I could stay and watch the map today." "No," Mum replied, "and hurry up. Ben's waiting." Mum went to Grace's wardrobe and took her training uniform from the hanger. "Griffins stick together, Grace," Mum went on. "We had an important job and Moorland relies on us wardens to keep the country safe," Grace finished. "I know." She took her uniform and began to get changed. It was a light brown jumpsuit with a golden symbol of a gate on the chest. There were pockets everywhere, the arms, the waist, the hips, and the thighs. But Grace's favourite pocket was at the bottom of the leg, where the stunt stick would be kept when she was finally allowed to have one. Each pocket contained an item of wooden equipment: notepad, rope, med kit, and a variety of small tools. All lightweight for easy travel. "Watson, will you watch the map while we're out?" Mum asked. The Griffin map was the most important piece of technology in the city of Copperot. It showed the entire country of Moorland and included portals to let the Griffins travel into the map to help people. The Griffin family had been wardens of the map since the great-grandma Griffin had invented it. They helped to keep law and order in Moorland. Mum was a warden, and Grace's brother Ben now, too. He was 15. Crime in the country had been halved since the invention of the map. Aunt Griffin took the family's positions as wardens very seriously. "I'd be delighted to watch the map," Watson said. Grace huffed to herself. "Grace, you're going, and that's that," Mum told her. Grace, Anne, and Bren walked along the wet streets of Copperport, rain pounding on their umbrellas and the many-layered rooftops of the city. The hydro mill, which supplied the city with power, turned slowly in the distance. It kicked up a strong, salty aroma from its position, where the river met the sea. Grace glanced at Ben. "You're walking like a peacock," she whispered. "And why's your hair all smoothed back like that?" Ben scowled and pulled up the collar of his uniform. Grace and Ben are used to do everything together, but now that Ben could go out on missions, he was acting superior to Grace and wasn't interested in training with her. She sighed to herself. She was just as good as Ben at self-defense. Last week, Grace had scored more points than him in the rescue simulator where they practiced missions. Bren had accused Watson of helping her. As they walked, everyone they passed greeted Anne Griffin with a nod or a word of thanks for keeping Moorland safe. Anne always smiled humbly and said it was her honour to be looking out for those in need. Soon, Grace, Ben, and their mum were outside the Mayor's Pick's office. It was a tall red brick building with a pillared entrance, the most impressive in the street. One of Mayor Pick's assistants led them up the stairs to a grand office. The golden-haired Mayor Pig sat behind a large desk, smiling in his green velvet jacket and ruffled neck shirt. "Anne, Ben, how lovely to see you," Mayor Pig said. "Do come in and sit down." Grace looked down on herself, wondering if she become invisible. Ben and Anne sat in two of the seats in front of Mayor Pig's desk, which was covered in toppling piles of paper. Mayor Pig moved a stack to the side so he could see Anne Bell. It seems I spend my days signing pieces of paper," he said, smiling sadly with a small shrug. Grace stood behind Anne and Breen, feeling like an unwanted guest at a party. Mayor Pig turned to Ben and said, "Congratulations on your resubmission into the map. The way you handled the attempt bank robbery in Renwick was really incredible. The residents of Renwick had declared you a hero for putting a dangerous thief out of action with the swift use of a stun stick. Apparently, the thief was planning a series of burglaries across town in the east, which has now been prevented. It does show how important the map is in keeping our country lawful." Grace's eyes began to wander around the room as Mayor Pig continues to lavish more praise on Ben. She took in the oak shelves filled with books and many spyglasses. Grace counted 32 spyglasses. The mayor must collect them, she thought. Ben began to recount the details of the mission, and Grace shuffled quietly towards the shelves. Here's a picture of this, yeah. Her attention was caught by a large, beautiful spyglass. It was crafted in rose wool and overlaid with a wave pattern in the mayor's family crest, both in gold. The crest was a shield with a P in the center and a gallant ship on the top. Grace took the spyglass from its holder and raised it to her eye. "What are you doing?" Mayor Pig snapped. Grace jumped and the spyglass slipped from her hands. She fumbled to catch it, but it clattered on the floor. Her back tensed. Mum rushed over. "Grace!" she said with quiet force. "Sorry," Grace said, and flashed an apologetic smile on Mayor Pig. Mum picked up the spyglass and replaced it on the shelf. "I'm very sorry, Mayor Pig," Mum said. "Do forgive my daughter. She's keen but easily gets distracted." Ben rolled her eyes while Grace followed her mum back to the desk and stood behind the chairs. "As I was saying," the mayor continued, "I would like to give you one of my spyglasses as a reward, Ben. I don't just give them to anyone, you know." The mayor glanced at Grace and frowned. "They're very precious," Mum said. "We can't possibly accept, Mayor Pig." Ben slumped in his chair. "Nonsense, Anne," the mayor argued. "And call me Clement. After all, we did go to Copperport Academy of Science together." Mum smiled, but Grace knew that she would keep calling him Miss Mayor Pig because Mum did everything by the rules, like not allowing Grace to go on a mission until she was 15, no matter how much Grace begged. The mayor put a spyglass on his desk in front of Ben. It was just like the one Grace had picked up. "It's beautiful," said Ben. "My family has crafted spyglasses for generations," said Mayor Pig. "We've become rather good at them." Ben accepted the spyglass and another of the mayor's assistants saw them to the door. Outside, Mum and Ben both turned to Grace. "Can't you stop fidgeting for one moment?" Ben snapped. "I was so embarrassed when you dropped that spyglass," he stormed off ahead. Mum shook her head. "Your time will come," she said. Chapter 2. The Griffin Map. A few days later, Grace and Ben were in the Griffin's map room. Grace was repairing a broken stun stick while Ben was polishing his spyglass, which now took pride of place on the mantelpiece. The map room was the heart of their home. The high walls were lined with shelves heavy with books and mission tools, and a large painting of great-grandma Griffins hung above the mantelpiece. The room was painted in the blue of a clear evening sky, with golden stars dotted all around. A brassy globe with orbiting moons hung from the centre of the high ceiling, and beneath it was the most important thing of all, the Griffin map. The map was laid out on a huge table. It was made of thick paper and showed all the towns and villages of Moorland. It had been created that even so that the most remote places could call for help. Each town or village had its own electrical Griffin gate on the map. These ornate golden gates looked like the sort that formed the entrance to a grand country home. When a call came from a town or village that needed help, their gate flashed a different colour. If the gate flashed red, it was an emergency. Blue was for small incidents like a cat struck up a tree, a lost item, or a minor argument between townsfolk. Mum moans that people these days were unwilling to think for themselves and called help over anything. The warden could then touch the gate to teleport to the location. It was important that you always take a reed compass with you, a pocket-sized device that would teleport you back home. Mum hurried into the map room. "I've got to go and sign some paperwork at the mayor's office," she told Ben and Grace. "Ben, you're in charge of the map." She looked over at Grace and then to Watson. "Watson, I've been thinking," Mum said. "I'd like to give Grace some extra training. Her coordination and focus needs to work." Grace looked up. The mayor shouted and made me jump. That's why I dropped the spyglass the other day." She folded her arms. Mum walked over and kissed Grace on the head. "They say that great-grandma Griffin was a fidget too," Mum said. "If you're going to be ready to be a full warden in 2 years' time, you need to be more focused." Grace looked up at the painting of great-grandma Griffin. The similarities between Grace and her great-grandma was well remarkable. The long, shiny black hair, high cheekbones, and sharp eyes. In contrast, Mum, Ben, and Ben had short blonde hair. Great-grandma Griffin may have been a fidget, but she was also brilliant. It was said that she started and invented the map at the age of 13, the same age that Grace was now. Great-grandma Griffin's best friend had been stuck for 3 days in a collapsed tumble in one of the remote villages. He had died just before help could reach him. Great-grandma Griffin had been heartbroken, and he had driven her to invent the map so that people in trouble could be helped faster. Mum checked the readings on the map on the screen. "Thank goodness for a quiet week," she said to Ben. "I better get going. I'll see you soon." Then she left the room. Watson flew over to the training area. "Come along then, Grace," the Raven said. "No time like the present." Grace rolled up in her uniform sleeves. "Ben, why don't you join us?" she suggested. They always used to have fun training together. "I'm too busy," Ben said, picking a book off the shelf and sitting beside the map. Grace huffed. Watson chopped the back of her leg with his wing. Her knees went to jelly. "Hey, I wasn't ready," Grace cried. "Combat rule number 1. Always be ready," Watson said in Mum's voice. Watson had the ability to record speech and play it back whenever he wanted. Grace found it annoying, especially as Watson mostly played back Mum's many warden rules. They began the training warm-ups. This was a routine of stretches and lunges, and then a series of arm twists and leg sweeps, all with the aim of keeping flexible and sharp. After the warm-up came combat, sparring, where you had to win points by disarming your partner. Mom said you never knew what was going to be on the other side of the gate. It was true that most calls could be solved simply, but wardens should always be ready to defend themselves. After a while, the front door bell rang. "Grace, the door," Ben said, looking up from the manual he was reading and raising his eyebrows. "I'm busy training. I'm Watson Congo," Grace replied, looking down at Watson. The Raven was pinned beneath her grip. "But I'm in charge of the map," she said, Brian. "It's probably this month for getting a key again." Bren let out a loud sigh and strode into the hallway. Grace released Watson out of the corner of her eye, and she saw a man at the front door, hearing saying, "Spare parts for sale." "No, thank you, we don't," Ben started. "Cogs, fuse boards, micro screws," the man interrupted. No, we're really, Ben tried again. Iron web, electro bulbs. The man was very persistent. The cold, wintry air from outside blew into Grace's way, so she got up and shut the map room door. Right, Watson. Best of 5. Grace began, but her attention was suddenly caught by a sapphire blue light flashing on the map. A call was coming in. Grace hurried over to the table. The light was in a small village to the far north marked Mudford. Someone needed help. A strange fizzling started in Grace's stomach. Perhaps this was her chance to prove that the angel was silly. There was no real reason why Grace couldn't answer the call. She had as much training as Ben. The light changed to red. It was an emergency. Someone needed help right now. Ben was still speaking to the man at the front door, and Mum was at the mirrors. They couldn't blame her for trying to help, surely. Don't even think about it, Watson said, flapping his wings to land on Grace's shoulder. Brett, Watson started calling. Swiftly, Grace clamped her hand around his beak. Her mind was made up. This was her chance to prove herself. She glanced around and saw that Ben had left his recompass on the arm of his chair. Still holding Watson's beak, Grace dashed over and stuffed the recompass into her pocket. Then she saw the stun stick she just mended beside and shoved it into her ankle pocket. Watson's muffled protest wouldn't stop her. She dashed back to the map and touched the flashing gate. Large Cecilia shop. In an instant, it was all as if Grace's body was being pulled in so many directions at once, and she was surrounded by bright blue cracking light. She landed with a thud, feeling as if her body had just been broken into 1,000 parts and then jolted back together. Grace gazed out around. She was in a village that looked like something out of a fairy tale, with crooked old buildings, coned rooftops, and creepy ivy. Not far away was a tall red box with windows. Great-Grandma Griffin had replicated these from old times, Mum said. They had used for something called a telephone. People could call the wardens for help from these red boxes. Mum said that you could teleport anywhere within 15 meters of the box to call you. Across the square, a woman stood in the doorway in a shop called Celia's Hardware, beckoning Grace in. Watson dug his claws into Grace's shoulder. Ow! I forgot you were with me when I answered the call, she whispered. I can't believe you just did that, Watson stammered. Grace straightened up. She needed to look as if she did this all the time and wasn't feeling like she had just been through a hydro mill. Grace approached the woman, who ushered her inside. I'm Warden Grace Griffin from Copperport, she said. Someone put in a call for help. The woman had a golden bun and scared blue eyes. You're a bit short for a warden, she said. Grace raised her chin and replied, I'm fully trained. Was it you that put in the call? Grace glanced around the shop. Shelves and baskets were full of brushes, mops, jugs, cups, and soaps, and all the like. But there didn't seem to be anything amiss. She hoped that Watson wouldn't say something to give her away, but she still seemed dizzy from the teleport. The woman stared at Grace. There's a monster in the forest, she said. It raided the village this afternoon. Everyone is terrified. A monster? Grace couldn't help but frown with disbelief. That's what I said, the woman snapped. A bead of sweat wound down her forehead. I'm sorry, can I get you a glass of water, miss? Grace said. Mission rule was to assess the mediation. Rule 2, look after the caller. The woman shook her head. Call me Caesar. Of course, Caesar's Hardware, Grace replied. And it happened just this once. Things have been going missing for weeks, Caesar explained. The villagers had been blaming each other. I saw the monster with my own eyes this afternoon. It disappeared back into the forest. Then I made the call. Grace whipped out her notebook. Mission 3. Keep notes on the situation. And what did this monster look like, Grace? Large and scary. Anything else? It wasn't much to go on. Though, Grace, are you sure it wasn't a fox? Maybe a hungry badger? The woman's cheeks blushed like shiny red apples. It was a monster, I tell you, she insisted. Grace had to admit that a monster in the forest was a bit more than she hoped for. But if she dealt with it, then Mum and Ben would have to agree that she's ready to be a full warden, that the age rule was nonsense. Are you certain there isn't anything else you can tell me about what you saw? Grace asked. Sia thought for a moment, and I think it had red fur. Grace wrote this in her notebook, then glanced outside, where several villagers had now gathered. She was certain the monster would turn out to be a forest animal. Grace decided to interview a few people, then follow the creature's tracks and find the evidence to reassure them all. Then recompass to get back home in time for tea and be praised for good work. Don't worry, Cecilia, Grace said. I'll soon have it sorted. Thank you everybody for reading, for joining me to read Griffin's Gate. We'll continue with chapter 4, Large and Scary. Thank you everybody, and bye.